We will talk to you today of your time, representing that of the ego program. Now, really listen to what we're saying here. The ego program, which means the entire nature of the ego is a program that you will find embedded within your own genetics. That's what it is. It is a genetic anomaly program. It is implanted there. That particular genetic program is something that represents a counter initiative to attempt to prevent those to moving themselves up into a greater state of expansion, of awareness, of the realization of who and what they are. It's like a chain, it's like a shackle for your own genome. It was placed there, going back several thousands of years, to what you would term as the telling of the biblical proverb representing Noah's Ark. Around that time, there was a major cataclysm on the planet that enabled a reprogramming and genetic tweaking of the human species, moving your genetics into a greater state of compression that therefore escalated the nature of what you would refer to as the ego program. Now, it's not actually referred to as an ego. That is contemporary through your own language and through your own discoveries. It truly represents a spiritual restraint program. It is a restraining program that will help you to keep yourself, shall we say, in line with yourself, to be much more in touch with physicality, to be much more in touch with memory, to be much more in touch with time, and to basically, in that sense, move into a state of self-value and self-worth. That self-value and self-worth is what you would refer to as the restraint program, or what you refer to quite commonly as the ego. So the ego is nothing more than a particular genetic pair that resides within your own genome. Adronis, is it possible that the ego program can be shut off? Yes, it can. And this is exactly what your ancients have been telling you about the nature of meditation, about the nature of letting go, about the nature of surrendering. In yoga, you also have what's known as the 3 knots principle. That here is a knot, that here is a knot, and that down here is another knot. And what the yogis would do is they would untie those knots, because you will actually notice that when you look at the actual ego gene in that way, it represents a triplication. It represents, in that sense, an embodiment that's actually plugged in through the nature of your navel, your heart, and your own frontal lobe. That, again, is where this is contained. And it basically serves as a type of buffer or restrainer or a compressor in that way. It is basically causing restraint. And this is all part of a genetic program that was placed in your species during the time of the Noah's Ark proverb, where, again, representing the nature of the great flood, actually represented the idea that the species themselves was being re-assimilated and retweaked through the nature of genetic programs, where there was, in that sense, what you would commonly refer to as a type of extinction level event, to where the humans that would therefore propagate afterwards would therefore have this particular genetic sequencing placed within themselves, compressing the nature of their genetics and therefore amplifying the nature of this egoic program, or again, the self-restraint program. So it is not referred to by the genetic manipulators as an ego. That's a human term. All right. It is much more on the idea of restraint. That's what it is. It's a restraint. It's a chain. It's a shackle. And it's something that, again, resides with your own genetics, contained within this body, because you will notice that as you leave the body, you will notice that that ego really isn't there. But the imprints of what the ego has done to you will follow you. But you really will not even have an ego when you leave the physical body, other than the imprints that the ego has left behind for you that you have personally adopted. The ego is a finite thing. It is a genetic program. This is why we say it really represents a casting shadow. It's a shadow of yourself because it is genetically imbued into your own genetic genome, your own mainframe, as it were. It's a program. There will come a point where your people will actually discover technologically how to shut this off. And it can be done through a multitude of different frequencies. A little too complex to mention here through the verbal nature, but you have to look at it in that sense as a very large lockdown combination. It's like having a lock within a lock within a lock within a lock within a lock. And you basically have to bust open the first lock. And then you have to start working together and manipulating with the second lock, and then the second lock goes down. And then you have to manipulate with the third lock, and then the third lock goes down. And then there's deeper manipulation with the fourth lock, and the fourth lock goes down, and so on and so forth. It's like a wall within a wall within a wall, a lock within a lock within a lock, a knot within a knot within a knot. And so again, this is what the yogis were able to discover pertaining to the untying of the knots through their frontal lobe, through their heart, through their navel. And so working together with that really comes into programs where, again, you are abolishing those programs, where there represents a great deal of fear, anger, sadness. Everything that invokes the ego is basically being subdued. That's, again, the yogic philosophy. They would look into all of the matters pertaining to mental and emotional duress and seeing exactly what is the cause that would, in that sense, fire up the egoic program. The egoic program would therefore be unknotted through the practices that the yogis would give their own disciples, students, and so forth. And this is still being taught today to a very few select people. It is not widespread. Because when you look at yoga, many of you will think that you're going to studios and doing a bunch of stretches. And that's not the idea. The true nature of yoga is to bring yourself into union. And so the yogis knew this. To untie the knot here, to untie the knot here, to untie the knot here. And you will notice that they become completely and totally without ego. And why is that? Because they've shut it down. They've completely deactivated the genetic trinity that represents that particular base pair. That is the ego program, or again, the program of restraint. So you have to understand that the reason why you act in an egoic manner is because you've been feeding yourself this ego that resides within your own genes. You've been making the shadow bigger and bigger. And in order for you to shrink it down and shrink it down and shrink it down, well, breath control is certainly one particular aspect of that to help shrinking down the ego. The second is to be aware of your own patterns. What is it that makes you angry? What is it that makes you sad? What is it that makes you fearful? What is it that brings up these traumas within yourselves? Well, that's what you need to document. This is exactly what Brad has been teaching you for years, for those of you who have been here as long. And being able to shrink those down, shrink it down, shrink it down, shrink it down. Let it go. Surrender. And as you do, this is what's helping you to completely and totally abolish the egoic program so that you actually walk this entire earth without an ego. It can be done. Many of your ancient masters have done this. There are masters on your planet right now who have actually done this. That no matter what you do to them, you can't make them angry. No matter what you say to them, you can't make them sad. No matter what you try to portray through action through them, you can't make them fearful. They have completely bred all of that out of themselves. They have deactivated the restraint program because the ego is just a genetically engineered program that was placed upon humanity so that humanity could serve much more of those who they felt were their gods, were their authority, their higher authority. And again, the ego program is basically supporting the nature of you being dependent on others, supporting the nature of you remaining within separation consciousness. There's a gene for that. And that's what the ego is. It's a gene. It's a program. And it's something that can be deactivated, just as many of your ancient masters have told you throughout the ages about learning to let go, about learning to surrender, working with the breath, getting deeply into your own traumas and bringing them into peace. And as you do that, that is the natural application in helping to abolish and deactivate permanently the ego program. Once it is deactivated, it cannot be activated again. And so again, this is the great work. This is where you become truly egoless. Because when you look at humanity in its ancient times, it did not have that gene. It was a unified culture. And you can see that by much of the ancient structures that they built. When you look at Angkor Wat, when you look at many of these ancient establishments, these ancient structures throughout Cambodia, throughout China, throughout India, throughout the Inca, throughout Peru, throughout all of these different places, throughout your times, going back thousands of years, Egypt, etc. You see these beautiful structures that were all intricately engineered to expand yourself. They are living technologies. They are also power centers, which means they can also generate power. But they are also healing centers, which means they can charge your body and giving your cells exactly what they need so that they can self-heal. Sound familiar to what Brad is doing with Radiate? Because that's basically what's happening. You're taking a sacred site and you're putting it in your pocket with what you're doing with Radiate. And this is why he has been very, very highly encouraged through his own inner guidance to just focus on that and nothing else until it is complete. So what you're doing with something like the Radiate program is you're putting it on your phone, you're putting it in your pocket, and now you have a sacred site in your pocket. And that's what's happening. You're energizing yourself. Adronis, can this help to alleviate the ego? It can soften it to a certain degree, yes. But again, for you to completely unknot yourself, that is again where you need to come to terms with your own situations of fear, anger, sadness, your own traumas, and clearing those away, abolishing them. Once you know the pattern of how you do this, and Brad has taught you this, the only thing that remains is your consistency. The only thing that remains is your dedication to doing it. And you know why you may not always be dedicated? Because the ego program is kicking in. I don't want to do this. I got other things to do. I got to take care of the house. I need to take care of my children. I need to take care of my family. I got to go out and make some money, etc. And that's the ego at work. Anytime that you find an anticlimactic reason to abolish what you're doing that's helping you make yourself healthy, that's the ego program stepping in and basically attempting to possess you. Because that's a genetic imprint contained within your body. That is the restraint program. That is the ego program. You have to learn to shut it down. If you truly want to bring yourself into livingness, not survival, but livingness, you need to learn to shut it down. And it can be done because there are those on your planet who have done this. You can do it too, as long as you make your willpower greater than the ego program. That's what matters.